get that across is to sort of just start with a story and walk you through how I ended up here and the research that we're doing right now up in Queensland and what's happening there. So the story sort of starts basically on a park bench in a place called Queen's Park in Toronto, Canada, in April of 1995. And I had been in the city about a week. It was cold. Actually, I learned later that it wasn't cold. But I'd come from Queensland, I thought it was cold. So I'm on a park bench, and I'm experiencing all the physiology, you might say the symptomology, of what we would call anxiety. And it was sort of significant to me at the time because only a year or so earlier, my life had kind of derailed as an exact result of this, right? And so back in that time, I was living in Brisbane, and I'd sort of, it was the mid-90s, I was a 20-something-year-old male, didn't ask for any help, which is sort of the demographic that this works for. And so what I did is actually, I did a bit of exercise, saved a bit of money, and I moved to the other side of the world to a city where I didn't know anyone and had never been before, which it's worth saying here is not the ideal treatment for anxiety, if you think about it. So it comes back to this point. So back to the park bench. I'm sitting here. I've been in town about a week. I had every reason to be a bit nervous. I had a one-way ticket. I didn't have a lot of money. And what makes it sort of interesting and still sticks with me now, and in fact informs kind of everything I've done since then till now, is that I was kind of enjoying it. I kind of liked it. And it was fascinating to me. Because it felt like back then I used to surf quite a lot, or I went snowboarding in Canada. It was kind of like doing a snowboard run that was kind of harder than I really should, or paddling out in waves that were bigger than I should go out in. It was this sort of stress, but it was kind of fun, and it's really interesting for me at least, right? Because well, how is it that the same physiology, the same experience that I had previously, just a year or so ago, that actually prevented me from going out? Right, like it kind of derailed my career. I had problems with friends and everything, relationships and so on. How is it the same basic experience now is kind of enjoyable in a new context? And the question to me just had to be asked. It had to be asked. So I looked around. I popped around to sort of the Zen Center out in Toronto. I did a few things, but unfortunately for me, things went really well. I got into university. I did a music performance degree, a jazz performance degree, which is why I was there. I met great people. I had a girlfriend, had a car, had everything. It was great, actually, until one day it wasn't, right? Same thing happened though this time. The sort of that physiology I was quite familiar with, that anxiety that statistically speaking, many of you will have experienced as well, arose. But this time I wanted to be interested. What should I do? So now I really investigated this question because this has happened to me in the past, and I kind of got through. I'd had this experience before, and it was kind of invigorating and helpful. So what can I do about it? Because I wanted to know how much of my experience, how much of me, how much did I put myself through that in the past? And how much of it was sort of done to me from the outside world, which is what I had previously believed. So I poked around, and there's a lot of Tibetans live in Toronto. There's a big refugee community there. And in full disclosure, there was literally a Tibetan Buddhist meditation center, literally, I'm not making this up, across the road from my favorite pub. And I used to go there and watch hockey with my friends and hang out. And so one day I swung by and I picked up a brochure and read up on it. And so I went, and what happened, I guess, is that I learned the meditation practices, the basic meditation practices they were teaching, and the theory behind them both. And much to my absolute astonishment, it kind of worked, at least for me, right? Things got better. I kind of sidestepped this anxiety thing that was coming at me. My relationships got better. My focus got better. My sort of overall concern for other people improved. All these sorts of things happened that I had not expected, right? So I did what anyone, any normal person would do in a situation like that, is that I sold everything and I moved to India. So I thought, well, maybe there's a few things that I learned when I'm there that sort of differentiate that approach from sort of what you might be familiar with and how I'm using it right now in research that we're writing up as we speak. So here's a few things. Firstly, Buddhism is super goal-oriented, right? This was a surprise to me, right? Super goal-oriented. There are these goals, and there's like these sort of I call them in my thesis scientifically unverifiable goals, enlightenment, liberation, and so on. Yeah, and then there are sort of ways to get little sort of way stations along the way, if you like, ways to get there. So in Buddhism, there's none of this like all about the journey stuff. You know what I mean? Like you go across to the West and you deal with Tibet and say, no, it's about the journey. They're like, no. It's not like there's a path. And the reason there's a path is you get to the destination as fast as possible. So people who are like really goal-oriented, like who like ticking things off to-do lists, like my wife, really respond to that. So goal-oriented. Meditation, in the word is so fraught as we translate it from, say, Sanskrit or Tibetan. It's basically thought of as contemplative technology is the term I use. Yeah. And what the technology is for, the technology is specifically to get you along that path. That's what it's for. Right? So you use this technology in a way, we'll talk about in a moment, to get to these goals. Also, just a brief note on mindfulness, again, especially in the Tibetan tradition, but in Buddhism generally, mindfulness isn't the end game by any means. It never has been, never will be. Mindfulness is a tool. You develop mindfulness in order to do other stuff with it. It's a skill you learn in order to do other things. And that's missed a lot, I find, in the modern popularization where there's this idea that mindfulness is the sort of goal. It's not. Improving your mindfulness skills will help you better use the technologies to get you to where you're going, right? And then what you actually do with it is you apply it to things. There are these applications of mindfulness, we call them. Sometimes kind of poorly translated as foundations of mindfulness, you might have heard, some of you, but this is applications. It's like once you've got mindfulness skills, what do you do? There's all sorts of things you can do, but the thing that is most interesting to someone like me, and we'll come to what I'm using in the research we're doing up in Queensland, the one that's most interesting to me is that it's designed specifically to help you examine, right? Help you examine how much of your experience in your life comes from your side and how much comes from outside. Yeah. That is to say, in the interaction of me and everything else that's here, how much of it am I just accurately perceiving and how much of it am I kind of making up? And this should be of interest. Cognitive psychology, neuroscience, even quantum physics are all on board with this, that the amount of stuff that is coming from your side is at the very least, without being controversial, a lot. A lot. So you can see when I come back to the park bench idea, this is really important. When I stumbled across this in my studies, I was like, wait, I've seen this actually. I stumbled across this exact thing. I didn't have a word for it, but they do, right? In Tibetan, in English, we talk about it as dereification is a term, or cognitive fusion, these terms. And what it is taking that mental activity and treating it as real. And you can imagine, once I treat it as real, then that drives my behavior and away I go. So here's what we've got. We have over 8-week course, 8 90-minute classes, our intervention decreases anxiety, depression, no surprise. But what we did is we also measured on things that I had remembered as being a problem for me when I had mental health issues when I was younger, which is anxiety, rumination, and mind wandering. So we measured them on this. And what you'll find if you sort of dig into the literature a little bit, there's different types of mind wandering, there's different types of rumination. There's a sort of adaptive rumination, which is called reflective, and there's a maladaptive version called brooding. And the same is true for mind wandering. There's a spontaneous and deliberate, we call them, sort of adaptive, maladaptive types of mind wandering. And what we have found is that through the meditation practices we were doing, that the maladaptive factors drop away quite quickly. Right? Which presumably is driving a lot of that decrease in the symptoms that we saw. What is really interesting, and this is sort of the crux of what we were looking for, is that this what we call task-unrelated thought doesn't change. So over an 8-week intervention, people start with a level of task-unrelated thought, mental chatter if you like, to make it simple. And it's the same at the end, basically. It hasn't significantly changed. What's changed is the correlations. So that's to say the relationship at time 1 begins with task-unrelated thought significantly attached, if you like, to the maladaptive processes, to spontaneous mind wandering, to brooding rumination. They drop away, and what happens is the task-unrelated thought switches its allegiance and becomes correlated or related to the more adaptive types. And this we're positing as being one of the real mechanisms behind. So we've got this sort of symptomology and mindfulness intervention seem to decrease it, which is great. And I'm thinking, well, there might be other things. How about rumination, mind wandering, and so on? Yeah, that seems to play a role too, actually, important roles. Okay. It still doesn't answer the question why, right? Why does mindfulness do this? And so this is why we look back into 2,500 years of peer-reviewed literature from the Buddhist tradition and say it's this. It's basically what we call de-reification. It's the treating all your own mental activity as fact, right? It's treating all the thoughts, ideas, memories as being real, as being actually out there and as an accurate reflection of reality. This is where it comes from. And what you'll find is as you increase de-reification anyway, as this mechanism changes, people switch from the maladaptive type of mind wandering to the adaptive and so on. And then that drives these other changes. So what we have here and what I've been trying to do in the last few years of this research, and which is ongoing because we have a next stage coming up, is exactly this, is try to get these thousands of years old ideas about how the mind works, how suffering works, how happiness works, and why mindfulness should make a difference. Wrap it all up into scientific technology, into scientific terminology that we can publish and get out there in the public domain. And in that way, we're not trying to make Buddhists out of people. We're trying to sort of mine this contemplative sort of resource and bring as much stuff out of it as we can to make it absolutely relevant for people in the outside world for whom just 15 minutes a day will make a difference. I mean, more is better, but 15 minutes a day will bring about these types of changes. So my sort of finish by saying to you is the classic ending that is the classic. Whenever in the time of the Buddha, 2,500 years ago, when he was out on the town or his disciples were cruising around the village, and people sort of said, "Hey," like they'd come up to him and say, "Hey, you look like you've got your act together. What are you up to? What's going on?" Right? And so, I mean, I'm paraphrasing. They probably spoke a little differently, but that's the sort of way they say, "Oh, what's up with you?" And there was one answer they always gave. Right? And in Pali it's called ehipash. And it just means come and see. They're like, just come and see. Make your own mind up, but come and see. And make sure that it's based in some sort of logic, make sure it makes sense to you. So that would be my invitation to you in terms of the Cultivating Emotional Balance project in relation to any contemplative tradition you may be interested in, is with an open mind, with a skeptical mind, critical mind. Come and see. Thanks, Dad.